On Sunday, Gwinnett County Police say 44-year-old Sharell Canty was killed in a home in Grayson. Sharell was the co-owner of Opium Nightclub and the life of the party.
May 25, 2026. A Sunday morning in Grayson, Georgia. The kind of morning where nothing feels out of place. Quiet streets, neighbors going about their routines, the kind of neighborhood where people know each other well enough to notice when something is wrong. At 8:42 a.m., someone on Wilkerson Way picked up the phone and called 911. It was not a noise complaint. It was not a domestic disturbance call in progress. It was something far worse. A neighbor had found a body inside a home on their street. Gwinnett County police officers responded and arrived at the address. Nothing about that block prepared them for what was inside. No visible signs of chaos from the outside. No crowd gathered. Just a house, a door, and what was waiting beyond it. Inside, they found 44-year-old Sharell Canty. She was gone. Investigators immediately began working through the questions that every homicide case demands in its first hours. Who was this woman? What brought her to this specific home? Who else had been inside? And who, among everyone connected to her, had reason to be there that morning? Those questions would begin to get answers faster than most cases ever do. By the time the day was over, police had identified a suspect. The arrest came quickly, and when the name of that suspect became public, the people who loved Sharell Canty were faced with a detail that made the loss even harder to process. The woman charged with her murder was someone who had once shared her last name. The suspect's name was Stephanie Byram. She was 48 years old, and she was not a stranger who had wandered into Sharell Canty's life from the outside. She was someone who had been in it deeply, for long enough to have a legal bond that connected them beyond just friendship or circumstance. Stephanie Byram was Sharell's ex-wife. That one word ex carries a lot of weight in a case like this. It tells you the relationship had a beginning, a middle, and at some point, a formal legal ending. What it does not tell you is what existed in the space between that ending and the morning of May 25, 2026. And that space is exactly where this case lives. Here is the detail that most coverage of this story moved past too quickly. Both Sharell Canty and Stephanie Byram were listed as residents of Grayson, Georgia, not different cities, not separate counties, the same town. And based on what investigators found, the same address on Wilkerson Way. Two women who had legally ended their marriage were still, in some form, sharing the same physical space. Whether that was a financial arrangement, an unresolved separation, an ongoing connection that neither had fully stepped away from, or something else entirely, investigators did not say publicly. But the geography of this case matters. This was not a situation where a stranger forced their way in. Whoever was in that home had a reason to be there. They had access. They had history. And here is what makes that history matter even more, because before you can fully understand what was lost on Wilkerson Way, you need to understand exactly who Sharell Canty was. Not the victim in a case file, the person.
Sharell's about her business. Sharell put everybody in a position to win with her. She took everybody to the top with her, including me. Plus, she was a happy person. She wanted everybody to have fun. Never in a million years would I have thought that would have happened to her. Like I said, she was a respectable person. Everybody loved her, so I can't question God's plan. It's definitely hard on the staff, but we are a family. We're going to stay a family. Kevin, the other owner, he's very supportive. He helps us. He texts us every day to make sure that we're doing okay. If we need anything, if we're going to keep her legacy alive, that's all we have. That's all we have to do. Just keep the legacy going, keep Opium going, and make her proud from the skies.
Sharell was not a background figure in anyone's story. She was a co-owner of Opium Nightclub, one of the most recognized black nightlife venues in Atlanta. Opium was not just a club. It was a cultural landmark. It hosted Atlanta Black Pride weekend events, served as a gathering space for Atlanta's LGBTQ plus community, and operated as one of the few black-owned nightlife spaces in the city that held that kind of consistent weight. People did not just go to Opium to have a good time. They went because it felt like somewhere they belonged, and a significant part of why it felt that way was because of Sharell. Her role at Opium was not ceremonial. She was not a co-owner in name only, someone whose title existed on paper while others handled the actual work. She was present. She was involved in the operations, the events, the relationships with staff, and the ongoing effort to keep a black-owned nightlife space functioning and thriving in a city where that is harder than it looks. The staff knew it. The regulars knew it. And the community that had made opium part of their lives knew it too. She was described by those who knew her as someone who loved deeply, gave freely, and had a way of turning people who walked into her life as strangers into people who felt like family. Friends spoke about her in terms that went well beyond professional respect. She was someone people called when life got complicated, when business got hard, when they needed a person who would actually listen. One person close to her described her as someone she talked to every single day about life, business, love, and stress. That is not a casual friendship. That is a person who made herself genuinely present in the lives of the people around her. One person who knew her described her as a God-fearing woman with a heart big enough for everyone. That is not the kind of thing people say about someone out of obligation. That is what you say about a person whose character was consistent enough that it left a mark on everyone who came close to it. She was a builder, of a business, of a community, of relationships that people described as irreplaceable. The unbearable irony of this case is that the woman who spent years creating a safe space for others could not find safety in her own home. The community she protected is now the community carrying her loss. If Sharell's story matters to you, the least you can do is stay. Subscribe to True Aftermath so her case does not get buried under the next headline. Now back to the woman charged with taking all of that away. On the surface, Stephanie Byram looked like someone with everything to lose. She was a licensed real estate agent working out of Era Sunrise Realty in Duluth, Georgia, just a short distance from Grayson. She had a professional profile, a functioning career, and operated in a community where reputation and trust are the foundation of every transaction. She was not someone who read, by outward appearance, as a person capable of what she is now charged with. But Gwinnett County detectives did not hesitate. By Monday, May 26th, Byram was in custody, and the charges filed against her were not minor. She was charged with malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. The most important of those four is the first one. Malice murder in the state of Georgia is not applied to situations where investigators believe something happened in a moment of blind emotion or sudden impulse. It means the person charged is alleged to have acted with the deliberate intention to take a life, not in the fog of a moment, with intent. That standard means that in the assessment of the detectives who built this case, what happened inside that home on May 24th was not an accident, was not a split-second reaction, and was not something that simply got out of hand. The charge implies there was a decision made, that someone made a choice. The other three charges, felony murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm, each add a layer to that same argument. But it is the firearm charge that tells a specific story most people overlook. A weapon was not only used. A weapon was present during the commission of a felony. That distinction points away from improvisation and toward something far more deliberate. A firearm that is present during the commission of a crime is a firearm that someone brought to the situation. That fact will matter enormously when this case reaches trial. That distinction changes the entire frame of the story. A firearm was involved. A weapon was present. A weapon was used. And the woman now accused of using it was someone who had once stood beside Sharell Canty and made a legal commitment to her. If you want to follow every development in this case as it moves toward trial, hit subscribe right now. This case is still unfolding. The trial is more than 2 years away. And every new detail that surfaces, you will hear it here first. Let's continue. By the time Stephanie Byram was booked into Gwinnett County Jail, the news cycle had already done what it typically does with cases like this. It reported the surface. A woman was killed, an ex-wife was charged, a nightclub co-owner was dead, and then most outlets moved on. But there is a layer to this case that the headlines did not touch. And it is the layer that actually explains why this story matters beyond the facts of what happened on Wilkerson Way. Start with the motive. As of today, Gwinnett County investigators have not released one. No official explanation has been given for what brought Stephanie Byram to that home on May 24th, 2026, or what preceded the moment that ended Sharell Canty's life. The case has been classified as a domestic-related homicide, and that classification has been treated by most coverage as a sufficient explanation. It is not. Domestic-related homicide is a procedural label. It tells you the relationship category. It does not tell you about the history, the build-up, the incidents that may have occurred before investigators got involved, or the dynamics that existed inside a relationship that had legally ended but had not, apparently, fully separated. And here is the conversation that nobody is having, the one that makes this case bigger than one address on Wilkerson Way. Domestic violence does not have a single face. It does not belong to one income level, one profession, one gender, or one type of relationship. But within same-sex relationships specifically, it remains one of the most underreported and underrepresented categories of intimate partner violence in the country. The barriers are real: fear of being outed in the process of seeking help, distrust of law enforcement based on historical treatment of LGBTQ+ communities, a lack of infrastructure specifically built to support same-sex domestic violence survivors. The result is that patterns that should be interrupted often continue unchallenged until something irreversible happens. This case sits directly inside that reality. Stephanie Byram was a licensed real estate agent. Sharell Canty was a successful business owner and a recognized figure in Atlanta's nightlife community. These were not people operating on the margins of society. They were embedded in it, professionally visible, socially connected, and by every outward measure, functioning members of a community that had no public indication of what was happening behind closed doors. That is exactly how it operates. It does not announce itself. It exists in the private spaces of relationships, in the dynamics that only the two people inside them fully understand. And it often reaches a point of no return before anyone outside those walls has any idea how serious things had become. Sharell Canty had built a community. She had friendships that people described as irreplaceable. She had people who called her every single day. None of that protected her when it mattered most. And that reality is one of the most sobering parts of this entire case. One of the voices that stepped forward in the immediate aftermath was Tamara Young, a former player for the Atlanta Dream and a WNBA veteran. She spoke out publicly following the news of Sharell's death. Athletes at that level calculate public statements carefully. When someone in that position steps forward and connects themselves to a story about domestic violence in a same-sex relationship, it signals something important about how much was known about this situation among people inside Atlanta's interconnected social and professional circles. Then there are the words of the people closest to Sharell. One person who described herself as someone who spoke to Sharell every single day about life, about business, about love and stress, posted publicly in the days following her death. People who speak to someone every day know things. They notice shifts in tone. They hear about tension. They are often the first people a person confides in when something in their personal life is not right. In the weeks following the arrest, posts circulating on social media made it explicit. People with knowledge of what happened or what led to it were being asked to come forward. That kind of public appeal does not happen in a vacuum. It happens when people close to a situation believe the full story has not yet been told. And somewhere in the network of people who knew Sharell and Stephanie, there are pieces of information that could bring greater clarity to what remains murky. Was May 24th the first time things escalated between Sharell Canty and Stephanie Byram? Or was there a pattern that existed long before a neighbor picked up the phone that Sunday morning? That question does not yet have a public answer, but it is the one that matters most. In the days following her death, as Stephanie Byram sat in Gwinnett County Jail awaiting her first court appearance, the people who loved Sharell did not wait for a formal funeral to come together.
Friends, family, and community members gathered tonight to honor the life of Sharell Canty, the co-owner of Opium Nightclub. Canty was found shot to death inside a home in Grayson just last month. And the vigil celebrated her legacy with reflections, memories, and really just a show of support for those closest to her. Organizers say the event was about remembering the impact she made on the Atlanta community.
She touched a lot of lives. She helped a lot of people. She was selfless. She was about everybody. She loved everybody. She took care of everybody. And she was just an all-around person.
Those who attended say they hope to keep her memory alive by continuing the lessons and values she shared with others.
They gathered at Opium. Inside the club she had helped build, friends, family members, and employees filled the space and shared what they remembered about her. They talked about her generosity. They talked about how she showed up for people. They talked about what it felt like to be around someone who made you feel like you mattered. And the loss extends beyond the personal. As of June 2026, Opium Nightclub shows as permanently closed. A venue that had become a fixture in Atlanta's nightlife, a space tied to a culture and a community, is gone. Not because of a business decision made in a boardroom, but because the person whose presence helped hold it together is no longer here. That is what this case cost Atlanta. Not just a life, though that alone is devastating enough. It cost a community a place they called their own. It cost a staff their workplace. It cost a city, one of the rare spaces that existed specifically for them. Sharell Canty built something that outlasted her only in the memories of the people who were changed by it. And that is a weight her community will carry long after this case reaches a verdict. Sharell built a space so others would not be forgotten. Subscribe to True Aftermath so she is not either. If you are not going to subscribe, at least tell us why in the comments. You owe her that much. While Sharell Canty's friends and family were gathering inside Opium Nightclub to remember her, the legal system was beginning its own process a few miles away. A community in mourning, and a courtroom beginning to process what comes next. That collision of grief and procedure is one of the most difficult parts of any homicide case, and this one was no different. Stephanie Byram's first court appearance was scheduled before Judge Barry A. Steelman of Criminal Court Division. That appearance was not a trial. It was the beginning of a process that in Georgia can take years to reach its conclusion. The prosecution's task will be to build a coherent narrative that connects all 4 charges and convinces a jury beyond reasonable doubt. With no publicly released motive, their argument will need to rely heavily on physical evidence, the circumstances of the scene, the nature of the relationship between the 2 women, and whatever the investigation has produced that has not yet been made public. The defense, on the other hand, will probe every gap in that narrative. The absence of a stated motive is a gap. The complexity of an ongoing post-divorce dynamic is a gap. In Georgia, defense teams in malice murder cases often work to reframe the intent element, arguing that the circumstances do not meet the legal threshold required for the most serious charge on the indictment. None of that will be resolved quickly. This case could be 2 or more years away from trial. The weight of the charges, the preparation required on both sides, and the backlog that exists in the state's criminal courts all point toward a long road ahead. This case is not over. It is barely at its beginning. Every case has a center of gravity, one question that everything else orbits around. In the case of Sharell Canty, that question is simple to state and has proven impossible to answer publicly so far. What actually happened inside that home on Wilkerson Way on May 24, 2026? Not the legal version, not the 4 charges listed on a booking sheet. What happened between 2 women who had once been married to each other, who were both living in Grayson, Georgia, connected to the same address, and who ended that day with one of them dead and the other in handcuffs? Investigators know what the motive was, the defense knows, the prosecution knows, the only people who don't are the ones who loved her, and for now, that is the rest of us. The trial is coming. It may be 2 years away, possibly more, but it is coming. And when Stephanie Byram stands before a jury in a Georgia courtroom, the motive that investigators have kept close will finally have to be presented in public. The sequence of events that led to May 24th will have to be laid out in a room where both sides are accountable to the facts. When that day comes, the full picture of what happened on Wilkerson Way will be told. And the people who loved Sharell Canty will finally have the answers they have been waiting for since a neighbor made a phone call on a quiet Sunday morning and changed everything. Until then, the question remains open, and it is one worth sitting with. Based on everything you have heard in this documentary, the relationship, the charges, the classification, and the silence around the motive, what do you think drove this to the point it reached? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. True Aftermath will be here for every court date, every filing, and every answer this case eventually delivers. Subscribe so you are here when it happens. And if you are still on the fence, drop a comment below explaining why. Either way, you are not leaving this case behind.